he is the King of Kings. We sing praises to our King, for he is the King of Kings. Give him glory.
He's the King.
For he is the King. Give him glory.
For he's the King of Kings. Good evening, good afternoon, actually. Good afternoon, everybody. It's your boy BibleLover1234 back again with another live stream. Back with another live stream. It's been a minute. It's been, I think, 2 months. I think my last live stream was in March or April or whatnot. So we're back with another live stream. And in this live stream today, we are going to be reacting to a video uploaded by a popular Muslim apologist called the Orthodox Muslim. And in this video, with 21,000 views, he's actually interrogating me. Well, not interrogating, but I went up on his live stream to have a discussion with him because he, as a Muslim, obviously doesn't believe in the Bible. So in this live stream today, we'll be reacting to my discussion with the Orthodox Muslim, where we talked about the Bible contradiction, apparently, of the census of Quirinius in Luke chapter 2. And we also talked about his own contradiction, not really a known contradiction, but his own, where he says that basically the alignment of places that Jesus and his family goes to does not make sense and is not probable. So let me make sure. So my sound is... So I don't need to talk too much. Let us get right into this live stream. So let me open up the video. Let me share my screen. And hopefully this goes well. And I have to read specifically where they mention who was there. Even in that account, like, for example, the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, the writer talks about how he compiled narratives from people that he's heard, right? So even if in the case that there were the apostles, I'm going to grant it to you that not many apostles were at the moment of crucifixion. What did you say?
It doesn't say from people that he's heard.
So you see how it's starting right away. So he kind of cut it up. So we're starting to straight away into this. So we're just going to let it play. But I believe I'm talking about how Luke would have had good information that he received from the people he's around. Because if I'm correct, I mentioned to him Luke chapter 1. I think I mentioned to him Luke chapter 1. Let me share my window here. So let's open up Luke chapter 1. I think I mentioned Luke chapter 1. I think the first 4 verses there. So Luke 1, verse 1 to 4, and then Luke chapter 2. All right. So this is what I mentioned here. Luke says here, when he begins his gospel, he says, many have undertaken, meaning many people are doing something or are going through the process of compiling, putting together a narrative, a story about the events that have been fulfilled among us. He's talking about specifically the accounts of Christ's life in Israel, in Galilee, Israel, these places. Compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word handed them down, right? So what Luke is saying is that many people are trying to make their narrative or compile a work about Christ's life, that they're getting their information from the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word, referencing the apostles and people that follow Jesus, right? Because Luke wasn't an original eyewitness, at least according to how the Bible goes or tells us. Luke was a companion of Paul, who Paul himself was an original eyewitness, but Paul was later added to the group of apostles, like a 13th apostle. So Luke is saying in verse 3, so it also seemed good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first. Meaning Luke is saying that I am doing a very diligent work. I'm being precise in how I'm doing my things. I'm being precise. I'm being accurate. I'm trying to put together accurate history in my narrative, in my gospel, the gospel according to Luke. So Luke is saying, it seemed good to me to also make my own narrative or make my own gospel, basically, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very beginning, to write to you in an orderly sequence, meaning to write to you well in terms of in chronological order, basically how things went in time. To write to you in an orderly sequence, most honorable Theophilus. This phrase here also gives us major points as to Acts being written by Luke, since the same person is addressed by the author of Acts, which would be Luke. So, O major Theophilus, right? O most honorable Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed. So I think the point I was raising in the video here is that Luke's information that he would be telling us in regards to the census or in regard to anything about Christ's life is not just conjecture. Yes, Luke was not an original eyewitness like Matthew would be or like John would be, but Luke would have been around the apostles. So it's probable and plausible as well. Plausible means that it's reasonable, it makes sense. Because when he was using the video, I was having trouble with the definition. I can look at myself and critique myself. I was having trouble with the definition. But when I look at the definition of probable, it means something that's reasonable and sound, right? So it is probable, meaning it's possible, but it's also plausible, meaning it's sound and reasonable that Luke would have received information from the apostles, the original apostles, that he would have interacted with in his lifetime on his mission trips with Paul. He would have received information from them regarding the life of Jesus Christ and the work of Jesus Christ, as it says, just as the original witnesses handed them down to us. So when we look at the Gospel of Luke, we could look at this as proper history, accurate history, because Luke would have had the original eyewitnesses giving him information, not just handing them down in letters or in things like that, but maybe even direct. It'd be plausible that it'd be direct information being handed down to him since he was amongst them. And this is what we see here. The original eyewitnesses, the disciples, the servants of the word, handing them down to us. And he's carefully investigated everything. So Luke's saying that he is doing a very delicate work in putting this gospel, this writing, this information together. And I think that's the point I was making here. So let's get back to the video and let's continue. Sorry, this takes a little bit of time. Let's continue.
Doesn't say that.
Luke 1 says here.
Yeah.
It says, just as many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitness and servants of the word handed them down to us.
Yeah, handed them down.
Everything right to you, right?
Yeah, so handed them down doesn't mean direct transmission. For example, you as a Christian today, you could say, I'm a Christian and I believe in the faith that's been handed down to me by the apostles. It doesn't mean that you are directly receiving or transmitting anything from the apostles. We see an example of this from 1 Clement, okay?
He mentions these books that, for me as Protestant, I don't take as authoritative, but they're good for history, so it's fine him mentioning them. I would actually agree, and I think I did in this video. I actually agreed with him that yes, the term handed them down does not necessitate, meaning it does not mean exactly that it's direct transmission. Because as he rightly pointed out, the ministry of Christ or the information regarding the Lord Jesus Christ has been handed down to me as a Christian as well, all 2,000 years later. So the term handed them down does not necessitate direct transmission, and I agree with him. However, in Luke's case, what I was saying is that it's incredibly plausible. It's definitely plausible and definitely probable and plausible that Luke would have had direct transmission, considering that he was a companion of Paul and he would have been around the apostles in that first century time, considering that Luke lived within that first century time and he had direct access to these original eyewitnesses that we read about in Luke chapter 1, verse 1 to 4. So it makes sense. It would be plausible that the writer Luke would have access to these informations, not being handed down through writings or anything like that, but actually handed down directly because he would have been amongst these original apostles, Peter, John, and since Paul was around these original apostles as well, according to history, according to the Bible. Let's continue there.
where Clement says the same thing. What's been handed down to us. It doesn't mean that there is a direct transmission there. So I just in case that you were going to make that point, I just want to make
I will,
it clear.
that's the point I'm making. You're right. It doesn't necessitate, but I'll just go with the idea that based on the. 1 second, guys. Sorry about that, guys. Let's continue. Evidence we have, or the information we have of the Apostle Luke, that the evidence that he would have would be directly transmitted, because he was, based on the book of Acts, the writing of Acts, Luke was someone who was known among the group of the apostles and who would have received information there. So that's a claim I'm making. I didn't. Since this is like in this moment, this is like just live. It's called like an arena style. So it's not like I'll have access to all the information that I have now, since I'm in my room comfortable, able to just react to this. But I can provide evidence for that claim I made, because there are multiple times where Luke is amongst Paul while they're on their mission trips, while they're doing their work. I believe Acts 17 is a place here where we see it. Let me search it up right now. Let me see. Because, okay. So it says Acts 16, verse 11 to 13. So let me pull it up here. Acts 16, verse 11 to 13. Yes. So you see, let me pull it up on my screen as well so you can see it. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share the Bible. And we're going to go to Acts 16, verse 11 to 13. So you can see what I'm talking about. Acts 16. All right. So if you see here, and this is the passage where Paul finds Timothy, he converts Timothy's mom, and then Paul and Silas are thrown into prison, and the jailer is actually saved. In verse 11, it reads here, from Troas, this is a plural noun, so the only way you can understand the we here is the writer of the book and Paul and the others that are with him. So from Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight from Samothrace, I hope I said it right. Next day to Neapolis, and then from there to Philippi, Roman colony. And he says here, we stayed in that city for several days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the city gate by the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and spoke to the women gathered there. And then he goes on to talk about Lydia, right? So we see here that the plural noun we is being used here in reference to Luke, the writer of the gospel, and Paul. And the people with Paul, I believe it's Silas as well. So if that's the case, then this is information pointing to the fact that Luke would have been a companion of Paul, and would definitely mean that it was plausible that Luke would have been known amongst the apostles and would have easy direct access to the original eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ. And that's why he could say that as they have handed down to them these things to us, the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word, that's why I'm able to write to you, Theophilus, an orderly account of these events. So it's plausible that Luke would have had direct access to them, so we can trust his gospel as being reliable history, although Luke was not a eyewitness himself of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's long-winded, but that is the case. So let's continue here. Someone who I would say got direct information. And then you have the other disciples who would have gotten direct information from Jesus or from the disciples that were with him, with Matthew, Mark, and John. And then they would have written down what they've seen. So that's why I can go to the account and say,
one sec, let me just make a quick point here. If that's the case, if Luke is receiving direct transmission, then why does Luke contradict Matthew's nativity?
All right, so this is where we're getting into the topic at the bottom, scrolling across the bottom screen, which says that the census of Quirinius. So my claim I made to him because his topic for the stream was the crucifixion. So I was saying that I believe the crucifixion is true, and I believe that Luke's gospel is reliable history, as Luke would have had, as I said earlier, as I just said actually, direct access to the apostles who would give him information, accurate information about the life of the Lord Jesus Christ. So he's saying now, okay, since you made that claim, why is Luke contradicting Matthew in regard to the nativity story of Christ, the story and the events of Christ's birth? Now, obviously, I don't believe that, and this stream is about that mainly. So we're going to get into that now. We're going to see what he says, and we're going to get into that. Now, I want to preface this, though, by saying that I am not really used to this contradiction. I haven't read too much into this contradiction. I haven't watched too much about this contradiction. But I was put on the spot here, which I have to expect. That's how these go. Christians do it, Muslims do it as well. I don't believe that's how these go. But now I have more information, and I'll actually support what I said here, because what I said here was not actually wrong. It's just I didn't have all the information I would need. But I'm going to support it, and we're going to look into it right now. Nativity
of course he does. Luke has Jesus born after 6.
You see my claim? I said no, he doesn't. So we're going to listen to him.
AD, after Judea becomes a province of the Roman Empire, and during the Quirinius, or during the census of while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Matthew has Jesus born in the lifetime of King Herod the Great, which is 10 years earlier. And that's not only that, they have a different lineage for Christ. And
all right. So he mentioned the first contradiction he states. The second one he's stating right now, we're not going to get into because we didn't talk about that in the stream. We talked about the first one, which is the census of Quirinius. And this is where I have my information for. So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to look at the rest of the video. So if you listen to what he said that Luke states that Jesus is born during the time of Quirinius being a governor of Syria, and which would be which he said he's saying after 6 AD, according to Josephus, is Antiquities of the Jews, that writing of Josephus there in the, I think, 2nd century. But Matthew, when Matthew states that Jesus is born, Matthew says that Jesus is born in the time of Herod the Great. And I could show you this easily. So let's go to the Bible. And let's open it up. So we're going to book of Matthew here. So here we see it. This is Matthew 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, so Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the days of King Herod. So this is referencing Herod the Great, who history tells us was killed, or well, not killed, he died in 4 BC. So that tells us that Jesus Christ was born around the year 4 BC. Most say 4 BC, because he was born in Bethlehem in the days of King Herod, right? So, and this is Herod the Great. And it tells us at the end of the chapter here that Herod died. So Herod died, this would be, according to history, 4 BC. All right? So Jesus is born during the lifetime of Herod the Great. However, when we go to the book of Luke, chapter 2, it tells us here that in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole empire should be registered, right? And then it says this first registration took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. Now, according to the history in Antiquity of the Jews, written by Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian, this figure, Quirinius, was governing Syria in, I believe it was 680, which would be about 10 years after Christ was born. But it says here, the time came for her to give birth in this time that Joseph went to Bethlehem to be a part of this census or registration, which was happening while Quirinius was governing Syria. So the contradiction brought up is that Quirinius was governing Syria after Herod the Great died, according to Josephus' history. However, Matthew tells us that Jesus Christ was born during the time that King Herod the Great was alive. So the contradiction brought up is that Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. He dies in 4 BC. Quirinius is governing Syria in 680, which is about 10 years after. And yet Matthew says Jesus was born in the time of Herod the Great, which is 4 BC. And Luke says Jesus was born in the time of Quirinius governing Syria, which is 680. So If that's the case, that means Luke is off from Matthew's dating of Christ's birth by 10 years. And thus, that would look to say that Luke got this wrong. And if you're a critical scholar, if you're like a critical scholar or a Muslim like Libyano here is, you would take that view that Luke got this wrong, and thus the Gospel of Luke is not inerrant, is not historically accurate, and the Bible is not the Word of God. However, Christians do believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, meaning that we have to tackle these problems. But the thing about it is that God, in His mercy, in His grace, and in His preservation of His Word, has actually allowed us to be able to tackle these problems, because there are ways to reconcile this apparent contradiction. So I'm going to continue the video a little bit, and then we'll get into the ways to reconcile this apparent contradiction in the text. So I'm going to get more into the video. We're going to play a little bit more, and then we'll go ahead and reconcile it.
And they have Christ being from two completely different towns. So in Matthew, Jesus is already from Bethlehem. Okay, he's already from Bethlehem. Okay, that's his hometown. He goes to Egypt because of King Herod. Then when he comes back, and Archelaus, the son of King Herod, is now controlling that area, they're afraid that he's going to be just as bad as his father. So they go and they move to Nazareth as their new hometown. In Luke, Jesus is already from Nazareth. So Nazareth, he doesn't move there later. He's already from Nazareth. Then he goes to Bethlehem. Why? Because there's a census, Roman Empire-wide census, and they have to go back to the 1,000-year-old ancestry land, and Joseph's from the line of David, so they have to go back to Bethlehem. And while they're there registering for the census, Mary gives birth to him. And then after that, after 30 days, they go to Jerusalem for the rituals of the newborn, and then they go back to their home in Nazareth. So you have three contradictions just within.
So we're gonna. Hopefully, I have time to mention this as well. Touch on this. I want to finish up the stream by like 2:30, 3 o'clock. If I don't have time to mention this, then I'll definitely do another stream, because there's a lot to mention. There's a lot of information to go over on this as well.
The birth narratives. How would you explain that?
In response to the first one you brought up, could you give your source as to that Herod came? You said Herod died 10 years earlier. Yeah. So as I said, I was not, in knowledge with this contradiction. That's what I'm asking for a source. I like where you get his information from. I'm not saying he's lying though, because he does have his sources, but we're gonna get into that a little later, because he's not lying. We're gonna see where he got it wrong.
That's what we know from Josephus.
So you see, his source is Josephus, that Herod died 10 years earlier in 4 BC. That the Herod mentioned in Matthew died 10 years earlier.
Yeah, as we know that from Josephus. King Herod died in the year 4 AD.
Okay, let me see this really quickly, because it is the case that Luke talks about two different Herods as well. And that might be
I'm talking about Herod.
So you can see me mentioning two different Herods. I'm just, right now, I'll be honest, right now, at this moment, I'm grasping at straws. I'm going to mention something a little bit later that is actually probable and a good answer, but right now I'm just grasping at straws. I'm trying to understand this contradiction, because I'm not used to it.
Talking about Herod.
I would have to get specific.
But listen, I'm talking about Herod the Great. How we know that is because after Herod dies, because they flew to Egypt scared from Herod, it mentions his son Herod Archelaus taking over. So we know which Herod. It's the father of Archelaus. And the father of Archelaus is King Herod the Great. You understand? So Matthew has Jesus born during the time of King Herod.
He's right. So in Matthew chapter 2, obviously mentions Christ being born in the time of Herod the Great. The end of the chapter says Herod dies, and Joseph takes his family from Egypt to the land of Israel, which is something I didn't mention, but that's important. Remember that he takes them to the land of Israel, but then because he's scared of Archelaus, the son of Herod, now coming on the scene, he, as king, he takes his family from the land of Israel to the land of Galilee, which is in the north, and they settle in Nazareth. So there's two Herods here. There's Herod the Great, and there's Archelaus, the son of Herod, which Libyano is right about.
There's a 10-year difference. Luke cannot be transmitting information from anybody who knew Jesus. It's impossible. There's too many historical discrepancies there. And
he's saying this is a historical discrepancy because, as I mentioned, if Luke is wrong here, then Luke is saying that Jesus was born 10 years later than when Matthew was saying Jesus was born. That's why he's saying that this is a discrepancy. And I'm going to show how there are reasons to say that this is a false way to look at it.
Also, copying and using Mark as a source and Q as a source.
So he mentions Q source. Q source is obviously a hypothetical thing that they say that these authors took from a main source. It doesn't seem like that's the case. But if it was, it's not necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
I wouldn't say necessarily, because I'm looking at the text right
The
now.
Q source is hypothetical, and I don't think there's reason to believe it. Because just because you can have similar information doesn't mean you have to have a single source that you're getting information from.
I'm in Luke, and looking at Luke, it just mentions, for example, Quirinius, Caesar, Augustus, and you're saying that these individuals came before Herod. That's what you're saying? Just like you right?
No, I'm saying Quirinius, the census, when Quirinius became governor of Syria, that happens in the year 6 after Common Era.
So he's getting this, Quirinius becoming governor in 6 AD of Syria. He's getting this from Josephus, is Antiquity of the Jews.
So Herod dies in 4, and then Quirinius becomes governor in 6 AD. That's a 10-year difference, and that's not the only issue. You have the contradiction with the lineage, where Jesus has 2 different grandfathers, and you have Jesus being from, you have Jesus going to Egypt in Matthew, and that's impossible in Luke's account, because Herod in Luke's account is already dead. and in Matthew, his hometown is Bethlehem. In Luke, his hometown is not Bethlehem; it's Nazareth.
All right, just with the one you mentioned about Herod, because the thing is, it says that they went to Egypt, the boy Herod died, and then in Luke it says that the census happened before Jesus was born. So I'll just say then, if that's the case, you're saying, because I'm trying to get not used to this contradiction. So you're saying that
You could see here, I said I'm not used to it. I'm still trying to understand it. I'm still processing it. So I'm taking a lot of time here. And that's expected since it's arena style. But hopefully I'll get into
this coming into play as the governor happened after Herod died?
10 years after.
10 years after?
Yeah.
Who do you source for that?
Josephus, and we also have Tacitus speaks about it as well.
Right. So he stated that Josephus is the main one. I didn't check Tacitus's quote on this, but Josephus is the main one that says this, right? That this happened 10 years later.
Just do a simple search, will come up.
Yeah, I'm not so sure with an answer for this one, but what I have heard, I've watched snippets of stuff.
So you heard me say I'm not too sure of an answer. I'm making it plain that I don't know too much about this. I gotta be honest with that. If I go ahead strong and say I know and I'm giving him BS, then I'm lying, and that's wrong. And that would mean I'm getting cooked. Right now, I'm not saying getting cooked. I'm just trying to understand it. But what I will say here, and this is the main point I'm going to bring up, and then I'll go into my information.
We could say that I believe Josephus's accounts would be wrong. We wouldn't necessarily.
So that's the main point I said. This is actually something that's plausible. He's going to counter this. He's going to go back. He's going to go against this. But this is plausible that Josephus's accounts of this information here could very well be incorrect. It could be incorrect. But let's keep watching.
We say that he was.
And whose account is right?
They would say Luke.
Yeah, but what?
Him being the earliest source.
Yeah, but what's Luke right about? What's your?
So he asked me whose account would be correct. It'd be Luke. If I'm going with this explanation, because this is the only explanation I have in mind. There's different ways to understand this. This is one of them. But this explanation, what I have in my mind, is that Luke's account would be correct in regards to the timeline of of Jesus's birth, the timeline of Herod the Great's death, and Quirinius being governor of Syria. This is one explanation that you can go with. And Inspiring Philosophy, a prominent Christian apologist, he actually goes into this in one of his videos regarding the census of Quirinius in this 1st century time. But I'm going to stop the video there, because let's actually get into what I said there, because this is an explanation that's given to reconcile this apparent contradiction here. So I'm going to open up this window I have here. This is the Tyndale House. There are some people that produce some of the Bibles that you may have in your home. Tyndale House. And this writer for this article, David Armitage, he's one of their administrators. He has a lot of sources cited here because he is writing an article about this exact apparent contradiction. Was Luke wrong about the census? I went into this article after I spoke with the Orthodox Muslim, and I read it. And this article is a gem. It's gold, and he goes through a lot of information. So this is long, so I'm not going to read all of it. But a point he makes here on what I said is that for many people, this apparent contradiction between Josephus and Luke is easily resolved. Josephus was right and Luke was mistaken. Now, this is in and of itself, a presupposition that people bring, that just because Luke is a Bible writer means that his writing of history here must be wrong. That's a presupposition. We have to first take both of these at face value, look into them, their historical context, and then see which one is probable and most plausible to be correct in how they have the history outlined. That's why I have highlighted here what he says. If Luke was, as is widely believed, the associate of Paul, who traveled with him in the period described in the later chapters of Acts, like Acts 16, this implies direct acquaintance with at least one member of Jesus' family, his brother James, a notable leader amongst the believers in Jerusalem. This provides a straightforward route by which Luke could have learned about events associated with the birth of Jesus, even if James' mother Mary was herself no longer alive when Luke visited Jerusalem with Paul. So he's saying that Luke, as I said earlier, Luke would have direct access to the disciples of Jesus, and he mentioned specifically the brother of Jesus, James, right? Which is interesting. Now let's continue here. There is therefore a case, from a historical point of view, for at least reading Luke's account with an open mind and not concluding too quickly that he must have been uninformed, meaning you cannot just presuppose that Luke is wrong. There is a case that Luke could have been correct. Whilst it is sometimes claimed that the details of Jesus' birth would have been lost to the early Christians, this is not very persuasive. And let me continue here. A second reason to be wary, meaning to be kind of concerned of playing off Luke against Josephus and declaring Luke to be wrong, is that the accounts given by Josephus can themselves be problematic historically, meaning there are examples, and I mentioned this with my conversation with Libyano, there are examples where where Josephus has, at least according to modern historians, has been wrong in his chronicles of events. There are examples of that modern historians have stated, which is possible given that Josephus is a fallible human being writing about history. For example, as Andrew Steinman has made clear, the consensus position regarding the chronology of the end of Herod's reign is far from certain. Let me jump down here. There are indications that in juxtaposing information from different sources, meaning putting together information from different areas, Josephus sometimes misplaced or even duplicated events, meaning there are indications, there are at least concerns that this is possible. According to some of these scholars, I believe, what's his name? John Rhodes, right? This is a scholar, John Rhodes. Josephus' use of his sources was on occasion erratic, meaning Josephus used a lot of different sources, sometimes without really any reason to do so or without thinking about it too much. Rhodes argues in detail that Josephus conflated events at the end of the reign of Herod the Great with events following the exile of Archelaus, and that in so doing he wrongly associated the census of Quirinius with the later event. What he's saying here is that there are examples where Josephus has wrongly placed information regarding the son of Herod with his father, and that could show that Josephus may have very well been wrong in where he placed this specific census of Quirinius, because he may have placed with the later event when he's talking about an earlier one. Any idea that Luke must necessarily be second best to Josephus when it comes to comparing their accounts of the census should therefore be set aside. Meaning you can't, the author of this article is saying it makes no sense to presuppose that Josephus is right and Luke is wrong, when we could see examples of Josephus being wrong and erratic with this, wrong with the information he's stating and erratic with the sources that he's bringing to put together in his writings. That it's most likely, I'm not saying he's exactly wrong, but it's most likely that he could have been wrong with some of the evidence that he's presented about certain facts of history. Rhodes himself acknowledges that the overall case he builds may not be persuasive to all, yet his article does establish clearly that Josephus' account, no less than that of Luke, needs careful analysis and should certainly not be prioritized over Luke by default. So John Rhodes states there that you cannot just come to Luke saying that he is correct. No, come to Josephus saying that he's correct. And even then, if you're a scholar, you're not going to come to Luke saying that he's correct, but you're going to look at both and see which one has more plausibility and more probability that it is more accurate in what it states, especially when the two seemingly contradict. So the first answer, the first response, 30 minutes in, 35 minutes in, but the first response to this contradiction is that it is plausible that Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 2nd century, was incorrect in regards to his dating of the census, because there's good evidence to show that Josephus conflated multiple events that were actually not related in regards to Archelaus, the son of Herod, and his father, King Herod, and that he has taken information from sources erratically, meaning just out of the blue or bizarrely, like randomly. And Luke, in his writings, has been shown to be a very accurate type of historian. I have a tab open here, ChatGPT. I just searched up some critical scholars and conservative Christian scholars who state that Luke is an accurate historian. So let me open it here. Yep. So for example, you got up here William Ramsey, an older scholar, 1851 to 1939. He says here in The Bearing of Recent Discovery on the Trustworthiness of the New Testament, he says here, Luke is a historian of the first rank, not merely are his statements of fact trustworthy. This author shall be placed along with the very greatest of historians. All right, so this scholar from the early 20th century, late 19th century, he says that Luke is a very credible scholar. He also says here in St. Paul the Traveler and the Roman Citizen, he says here, I began with a mind unfavorable to it, but more recently I found myself brought into contact with the book of Acts as an authority for the topography, antiquities, and society of Asia Minor. Gradually I was compelled to consider the book of Acts as a work of the highest order of trustworthiness. Oh, you're not able to see. Let me let you guys see this here. Sorry. Close the sidebar. All right. So this is what I read up here. So this scholar here says here that he was originally a skeptic, but he became convinced of Luke's reliability through time. So he's saying he's an older one. So maybe we want more modern scholars, and we'll get to them later in this ChatGPT opening here. But he says he began to mind unfavorable to it, but as reading it, he found that Luke was generally and actually very accurate in his writings and his history. Right. So this is what this scholar here says, William Ramsey. Now, a scholar that people actually know here, F.F. Bruce. A lot of people know F.F. Bruce. He says here, Luke's record is exact. What's up, young Christian? How's it going? So F.F. Bruce says here, Luke's record is exact. He should be regarded as a writer of real historical insight. In his book, The New Testament Documents Are They Reliable?, written in 1943. Now, he's a conservative scholar saying this, right? That Luke is a good historian, that Luke does provide good information, right? So that Luke is credible. He says here again in his book, The New Testament Documents, page 88, a writer who habitually displays such accuracy in dealing with matters of external detail deserves to be taken seriously when he deals with questions of deeper concern. So he's saying again that Luke does take his time and does make it his job to be accurate in writing about these details regarding the life of Christ from another conservative scholar. Now, here's some more moderate critical scholars who touch on this as well, right? It says here, A.N. Sherwin-White, Orthodox classical historian. He says here, for Acts, the confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject this historicity must now appear absurd. A moderate scholar saying this in his book, Roman Society and Roman Law in the New Testament from 1963. So he's saying that to say that Acts is not historical is foolish. It's absurd. Because Acts' confirmation of historicity is overwhelming, meaning Acts is actually good with its regard or information of history, right? He says also, the historical framework is exact. In terms of geography, politics, and legal customs, the account is precise and reflects first-hand knowledge. So this moderate scholar is saying that, hey, the writer of the book of Acts, Luke, he is good with the history of this first century time. He knows the geography. He knows the political systems. He knows the customs of the legal system. He knows these things, and his account is accurate. His account is written well. Let's continue here. James Dunn. He writes in his book, The Acts of the Apostles, Epworth Commentaries in 1996. Mind if I join for a bit? My mom. Young Christian, I'm going to finish off like 2:30, 3 o'clock. So I think I'm gonna just do solo for this one to finish off. But I think I might do this again next time. Definitely I'll let you join up. No problem. So I see here James Dunn as well. He says here in his book, The Acts of the Apostles, Epworth Commentaries, 1996, he says, there is no reason to doubt that Luke has preserved accurate knowledge of the institutions, the titles, and administrative practices of the Roman world. It shows a degree of accuracy rare in ancient historians. And it says, Dunn is widely respected and not considered a conservative evangelical. So we see another moderate, or I think James Dunn is more a moderate scholar. He's saying that Luke is very accurate in his writings. Luke has preserved accurate knowledge of the institutions of the Roman system. Luke has kept these things. Luke knows what he's talking about, according to James Dunn. That Luke is a good historian, shows a degree of accuracy rare in ancient historians, meaning Luke is a gem or a diamond in the rough in terms of ancient historical writings. Howard Marshall, in his book from 1970, Luke, Historian and Theologian, he states, Luke is a consummate historian, careful and accurate in what he records. His writings exhibit a close acquaintance with the facts, even in small geographical or political details. So this moderate scholar, I don't know too much about him, maybe conservative, maybe moderate, but this biblical scholar or theologian, he states that Luke is good with his history. So we see these multiple scholars saying that Luke is good in regards to his writings of history. So I'm gonna finish there. We've gone through a good amount of biblical scholars there. What we see is that Luke is a good historian. Luke is accurate in his history in the book of Luke and the book of Acts. So it's not good to just presuppose that Josephus' account of the census is automatically correct and Luke is automatically wrong. No. Luke has shown himself to be a good historian. Not saying that Josephus is a bad historian. Josephus is a decent historian as well. But based on the evidence, it is probable, as I read in the article, let me put the article back up. Here. As I read in this article from Tyndale House, it's probable and plausible, it's reasonable to say that Josephus could have been wrong in regards to his dating of Quirinius as governor of Syria, his dating of Quirinius as census, and Luke could very well have been right. Now, that's one way to go about it. Because, yes, Luke is based. Luke is based, bro. He is based. Now, there's another way to go about it. That's the first answer, that Josephus very well and reasonably could have been wrong, and Luke could have been correct in regards to his timeline of Quirinius being governor of Syria and being in position as governor while this census was taken, while Herod the Great was alive, according to Matthew. Now we see here, whilst the question about the census might be resolved by claiming that either Luke or Josephus was wrong, that's the first view I just presented. Another possibility is that Luke has been misinterpreted, meaning Luke has been mistranslated, and that understood correctly, his account is compatible with Josephus. So a second avenue is that instead of saying that Luke is wrong and Josephus is right, which is what I presented to Libyano when I went on his platform, another avenue that can be taken is that, you know what? Luke has just been misunderstood in his Greek writing, and that what Luke is actually saying is compatible with how Josephus has these events chronicled in his writings. They say here the Greek language of Luke 2 verse 2, which is the verse regarding the census, the Greek language is not straightforward and there is some ambiguity. The description of the census is as follows, and it gives these Greek words here. This is regularly translated as something like, this was the first registration when Quirinius was governing Syria. Let me read what he says. There's a book online that also argues that Herod died after 4 BC and that the census happened around 3 to 1 BC. Thank you, young Christian. Right. Thank you. Book online that argues that Herod died. Right. So, hey, based on what young Christian wrote there as well, there is evidence to state that Josephus was wrong. That's legit. There's evidence to state that Josephus was wrong in his dating there. Now, this article also states that the Greek text could have been misunderstood because it says, as already observed, Quirinius, at least according to Josephus, was a governor of Syria following the ousting of Archelaus, too late to coincide with Jesus' birth in the time of Herod the Great. It is possible, though, that Quirinius could have previously held another significant administrative post in the region. during which a separate earlier census occurred. Now, if you noticed, I had open Got Questions article regarding the census as well. They mention what the writer here is going to mention as well, because they say in their third possible understanding of this that Quirinius actually ruled Syria on 2 separate occasions, and there were actually 2 censuses taken. So they say down here that the third one, explanation number 3, that there were 2 censuses taken and that Quirinius ruled Syria in 2 separate occasions, right? That there could have been another census that took place during his reign, during his rule as governor, his time as governor. This would make sense of the fact, back to the Tyndale House article, in this translation, Luke refers to the first census. It is difficult to find space for a previous governorship of Quirinius in the known chronology of governors of Syria. So the writer of the article is saying this is a possible explanation, but it's hard to fit this explanation into the understanding of the governors of Syria. But Sabin Hubner has recently argued that the key term need not necessarily, there's a Greek word here, need not necessarily refer to the actual post of governor, but is flexible enough to encompass other roles such as that of a financial procurator, a position which could be well associated with registering property. Not enough is known of Quirinius' earlier career to confirm or exclude such a possibility. So what they're saying is that this word here for governing or governor, this is the Greek word 2230. As it gives here as translation, a leader, a ruler, or proconsul, a governor, right? Someone that rules. And if I go here to Mounts' definition, 2230, he has it here to govern, to lead, to rule. So the word regularly means govern, right? Or leader. However, in the article, what they're saying is that this word has a bit of flexibility to say that it could also mean that he was leading in a position or governing in a position of not necessarily the governor of Syria, although that would make the most sense based on how the word is used. But it does have flexibility to say that this word meant he was serving in a separate capacity, a separate leadership capacity. And that could be what's being referred to here when they mention this census, and that there could have been a separate census other than this one, because this census would have been when Quirinius was serving in a capacity not as governor of Syria, but as a leader in Syria, as, like, for example, Sabin Hubner, the professor of ancient history at Basel University, as a financial procurator, or someone that manages the finances, manages that, and registering property. So this is a possible explanation. I'm not going to say this explanation is necessarily strong, but this is a possible explanation. And what the writer of the article says here is that not enough is known of Quirinius' earlier career to then reject this explanation, but it's also not enough to known to confirm it. So it's just one that's floating in the air. But I'm going to mention it because it's mentioned in the article. However, there's another explanation. Before I mention that, this is the book Young Christian mentioned that says that the census could have happened around 3-1 BC, and that Herod died after 4 BC. So, Young Christian, if I'm getting this right, I'm guessing that you're saying that this book argues that Herod the Great would have been alive during the time of the census. If I'm understanding what you said here correctly, let me know. Others have proposed, back to the article, that the Greek could mean this was the registration before Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, this explanation here that I'm going to read from here down, this explanation here is actually very strong. I believe this is a strong explanation, and I believe that this explanation, to me, if I have to choose between saying that Josephus was incorrect in his history and this explanation, I would say that Josephus was incorrect. I believe that's a very plausible explanation. But this one is very close to that as well, because this explanation says that the Greek of this verse has been understood wrong, because this is the word here, 441 I believe the root word is like protos, being first or foremost or chief, right? And it's usually rendered in the English, the first registration took place while Quirinius was governing Syria, right? But what the person in the article is arguing is that it could be rendered as saying that this registration took place before Quirinius was governor of Syria, since that word used there, 4413, let's search it up. This word is generally mentioned as first, but first in like rank or first in order, right? So it could also mean before, right? Or beginning. So they're saying that this word here, protos, in the Greek, could be rendered as before, saying that this was the registration before Quirinius was governor of Syria. And if that's the case, then this verse would actually align with what Josephus is saying. So if you're somebody that you want to actually have this text align with Josephus's historical reading, you can go with this explanation to say that Josephus has just been mistranslated by most of the biblical translators, which is kind of hard because you're going against the knowledge of the teams that have translated this verse in all these Bibles. The ESV says first, the Christian Standard says first, I believe the King James says first, the New King James says first, the NASB says first. So these translation teams who would be authorities in regards to, since they are very well read in Greek, they all have come together and they said, we're going to translate this as first registration, first census. But this is a possible explanation that the Greek has been mistranslated and it could actually be read before, or that it maybe has been misunderstood and that the word first has been translated correctly, but that term first can be understood as before. And then this would mean that before the famous census of 680 of Quirinius, another one was carried out by someone else, and that Luke is clarifying for his readers that he is referring to this earlier one. So they're saying that if this is the case, then it could be that Luke is referring to a census that happened before Quirinius carried out his census of 680, since the verse says specifically that this is the first registration, right? This is the first registration which took place while Quirinius was governing Syria, right? And they're saying that if it's translated before, it could be this registration took place before Quirinius was governing Syria, which would show that, according to Luke, there was a census that took place before Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and that this would actually align well with what Josephus writes in his Antiquities of the Jews. It would just be that evidence for a census before that would be mainly lacking, because I don't think Josephus mentions a census before that, and I don't think there's evidence outside of the Bible for that. And even in the Bible, this would be this would be like a separate view of how you can interpret or take this verse here. But this would be a way to reconcile it. While some respected commentators, for example, John Noland and David Garland, have evaluated this approach positively, right? Others are less persuaded, regarding it as a strained way of reading the Greek, right? So what they're saying here is that, yes, this is an okay explanation, right? They're saying, and they actually view this explanation as all right. But what they are saying is that, some commentators do not view this explanation as very accurate, right? So I'm saying it is a way that you can go with this apparent contradiction whilst not necessarily being a prominent one, right? Oh, thank you, Young Christian. Thank you. So as Young Christian said, there is a book, he put the link here, that states that Herod died after 4 BC or sometime around after 4 BC, and that the census happened earlier, meaning that Jesus being born while in the time of Herod the Great living and the census happening at the time of Jesus being born could align with history, at least according to this book you mentioned here. And you can go research that for yourself. I'm not arguing that specifically right now, but you can research that for yourself. But we see here that there is this possible explanation that you could take, this avenue that you could take, but some agree, some do not agree. And they say here that some say it's a strained way of reading the Greek, meaning you're kind of grasping at straws when you take that view. But as John Nolan points out, on any reading, the Greek of Luke's sentence is awkward. What he's saying is basically, if you're going to argue that I'm straining the text to come to this approach, then you're basically saying the text is very easily understood. But the text is not easily understood there. It could be viewed this way. So this can be a possible way of understanding it, which makes sense. So I'm saying that this view that I think Got Questions puts forward as well, that Quirinius ruled on 2 separate occasions, or as they say, there was someone that carried out a census before the 6 AD census. This is a possible view to reconcile this apparent contradiction. God Question says as well here, Quirinius actually ruled Syria on 2 separate occasions, and there were actually 2 censuses taken. The first census mentioned in Luke 2 verse 2 occurred during Quirinius' first term as governor, and another during his second term. The second census is mentioned in Acts 5:37 and probably took place between AD 6 and 7. So they're saying here that it could be the case that there were 2 censuses, and this first census of Quirinius was earlier in the time that Herod the Great would have been alive, and that the second census that could have been during the time of Judas the Galilean doing his uprising in the days of the census mentioned here that you see on my screen, that could have been the census in 6 and 7 AD, and that then Josephus would have just messed that one up there, because they say Josephus links this census to an uprising led by Judas of Galilee. And they say here, Luke was the author of both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, and his goal was to write an orderly account, which I read already. It seems that Luke did write a careful, orderly account. He mentions 2 censuses, and it was during the first one that Jesus was born. It would be unlikely for such a meticulous historian to make a blatant mistake in his timeline of events. So what they're saying in the God Questions article here is that there were 2 censuses that happened while Quirinius was ruling, because they say Quirinius ruled in 2 separate occasions. And there were 2 censuses. The first census was closer to the time of 4 BC and would have been around when Herod was alive. And then there was a census 10 years later, which is not the census that Luke is talking about. So this is an avenue you can go with to say that Luke is not contradicting Matthew's nativity timeline, basically. So let's go to the end of this article and let's finish forward. They give a third possibility that Luke is giving us like a flash forward event to a census, but I'm not going to go with that one. I'm just going to go to the end of the article. I think the 2 options, the 2 probabilities I gave are the best, which is one, that Josephus is wrong with his date and that Luke's timeline is better, that this census of Quirinius happened in the time that Herod the Great lived, which would be around 4 BC. So that's the first one, that Josephus was wrong with his dating, and that Josephus, according to his history, his articles of history, he was erratic with his sources at times, and at times he conflated events. So Josephus was not always incredibly accurate. And Luke, being a writer that was closer in time to Jesus' life, a writer who had direct and easy access to people who had direct access to Jesus himself, like the apostles, like the brother James of Jesus, Luke would have more plausibility of being more accurate in his rendering of the history here. That's the first explanation. That's the first answer. And the second one could be that there were 2 times when there was a census, and that you can understand the Greek text or the text of Luke 2 verse 2 to state that one, either that there was a census before Quirinius became governor of Syria under someone else, or you can understand it to say that Quirinius was governor of Syria or a leader in Syria at 2 different times, because the word for governor can be understood as a leader and you could say it's a leader in a different capacity. That Quirinius could have been serving as a leader in Syria or as a governor in Syria at 2 different times, and that Luke is referencing the first time he was a leader in Syria, as Luke says in the verse, the first registration took place while Quirinius was governing or was leading in Syria. Whatever the case may be, whatever view you take, this contradiction can be resolved, and Luke can be vindicated and shown as a reliable historian. As I already read in these scholarly quotes, many conservative and moderate or critical scholars of the Bible state that Luke is an accurate historian and Luke is good with his information. As James Dunn says here again, Luke has preserved accurate knowledge of the institutions, titles, and administrative practices of the Roman world, and it shows a degree of accuracy rare in ancient historians. Or let me go down. I think, look, Craig Keener, Luke's historical care is demonstrated by the incredible amount of accurate details about people, places, and political realities in Acts. His precision is exceptional even by ancient standards. So Craig Keener, who's a moderate evangelical New Testament scholar, he says that Luke cares about his history and that Luke is very precise. His precision is exceptional, as he says here. And Acts 1 more, look, M.T. Wright, which is a scholar that most people know. In 2008, he says Luke's account is full of small but telling details, which show that he knew what he was talking about. There's one right there. His geographical references and names and titles of officials and the cultural background all ring true, right? And he wrote that in Acts for Everyone, Part 1, 2008. And then this other one, The New Testament and the People of God in 1992, page 121, he writes, he is clearly writing history and writing it in the ancient style, which allowed for careful selection and interpretation, but which prized factual accuracy, right? So, I've been going on for a minute. It's 2:30. It's been an hour. I think I'm going to go till free because there's another contradiction that he mentions. I'm not going to play the rest of the video because it'll take time. It'll take time, right? But we're going to go into that second contradiction he mentions. Hopefully I do it justice. If I don't do it justice, I'll do another live stream on this. But a second contradiction Libyano brings up is one that is not actually mainly generally stated as a contradiction. It's one that he kind of has himself. But it's about the way the events are registered, the events are shown. Before I go through that, Young Christian says here, my view on this verse is that Luke is writing about an earlier census lost in history. He mentions the 86th census in Acts 5:37. Not sure if he mentioned that verse in Acts. Oh yes, I did mention it because thank you, Young Christian. I did mention that because I mentioned this article from Got Questions, and they state something similar. They state here that Quirinius ruled in Syria on 2 separate occasions, and that what Luke mentions is the first census during Quirinius' first term as governor, and that the second census, which you mentioned there in your comment, the second census of 6 AD is the census mentioned in Acts 5:37 during the time that Judas the Galilean had risen up with his kind of, rebellion, or his kind of, rose up like a rebellion, basically, during the days of this census of Acts mentioned in Acts 5:37. And they say here, this one probably took place between 86 and 7. And that they say in brackets, Josephus links this census to an uprising led by Judas of Galilee. So yes, I didn't mention what you said there, but thank you. Yes, that's a good. That one is good, and that's his view, and that's a good view to take. That there is an earlier census that is lost to history that Luke is referencing, and as we said, Luke is a reliable historian, so it's plausible that Luke is very correct in what he says, that there was an earlier census that took place in the time that Herod the Great was alive, in the time that Jesus was born, and that this census of Josephus of 6 AD is a second census in another time when Quirinius was serving a second term as governor, as Got Question says, as they say in their article here. Now, in the 30 minutes that I'm giving myself till 3 o'clock, we are going to go through a second apparent contradiction. Let me edit my banner here. Because this second contradiction is about the events of Jesus. Actually, the geography, the events, that was it. Like the places, actually here, the locations in Luke 2 and Matthew 2. This is the second apparent contradiction that Libyano, or the Orthodox Muslim, he brings up. To paraphrase, or to kind of shorten up what he says, in Matthew, we are told that Joseph and Mary live in Nazareth in Galilee, that the angel appears to them there, and that after the angel appears to them, they head to Bethlehem, the city of David, and in the city of David, Jesus is born. in the city of David, Bethlehem, because there's a prophecy that says that the Messiah, the one from long ago, the one from eternity, according to Micah 5 verse 2, he will be born in Bethlehem. So they go to Bethlehem. And in Matthew, from Bethlehem, they go to Egypt because Herod, when he learns about this Messiah or this king of the Jews, he wants to kill him. So they flee to Egypt because the angel says, flee there and stay there until I tell you to leave, until Herod dies. Herod then dies, and they return. Let me actually get the text up, so I because this is important. This part here is important. Herod dies, right? And the angel tells them that they can return to the land of Israel because those who intended to kill the child are dead. The land of Israel would count as Bethlehem. We could say Bethlehem here. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and entered the land of Israel, which could be viewed as Bethlehem. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And what I take that as is he was afraid to stay there. He was afraid to stay there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew, meaning he settled to the region of Galilee, which is north. This is actually a good place for me to open my map. How do I here? Where's my bookmarks? Sorry guys, can I show bookmarks? All right. So I'm going to open up here the map of Palestine in the time of Jesus, because this could actually be used here. All right. So this is the map of Palestine in the time of Jesus, or Israel. Sorry, the map of Israel. Why I keep saying Palestine? This is the map of Israel, or Palestine, however you view it. That geography, because there's a war happening there right now, so that geography is kind of, I'm getting confused all the time. But this is a map of Israel in the time of Jesus. And if you see here, this is Judea down here. Judea. And in Judea, we have Bethlehem, we have Jerusalem. So, and then we have Egypt to the west. Egypt to the west. Egypt would be over here. So, in Matthew, they leave Egypt, Herod dies, and they go to the land of Israel. Right? And in the land of Israel, they go there because Herod the Great is dead. And they enter the land of Israel. But when he hears that Archelaus was ruling over Judea, over this part of the land of Israel, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Judea, right here, you see, when he hears that Archelaus is ruling over that part, he was afraid to go there. I take that as afraid to stay there. So being warned in a dream, he goes to Galilee, and he settles in a town called Nazareth, which is up here. Nazareth in the north, you could see it. Galilee, Nazareth. He settles there to fulfill what was spoken for the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Matthew says the prophet because not one prophet says this, but this is a theme within the prophets that the Messiah would be one that's viewed badly, not viewed well. Like, and in John 1, verse, I believe, 52 or 50, through to the end of the chapter, Nathanael says, what good can come out of Nazareth? Showing that the child to be born would be a Nazarene. He's shown as being someone who would not be viewed too well. And if you're born in Nazareth, you weren't viewed well in the eyes of Israelites. And that's why Nathanael says, what good can come out of Nazareth? Let me actually get that verse for you so that you know I am not lying. I believe this is John 1, verse 50 to the end of the chapter. John 1, verse 50. Let me see. No, John 1, verse like 40. Load. Okay. So Nathanael says here can anything good come out of Nazareth? This is how Nazareth was viewed. So when it says in Matthew, then in Matthew chapter 2, that he will be called a Nazarene, I think it's lagging a little. Hopefully it stops lagging. When it says in the end of Matthew that he'll be called a Nazarene, according to the prophets, what is being showed is like Isaiah 53, that the Messiah to be born would not be viewed in a good manner. He would not be viewed in a positive way. He would not be viewed in a positive light. As it says in John 1, he came unto his own, but his own received him not. So that's the chronology, that's the events of Matthew, that's the geography of Matthew. Jesus born in Nazareth, comes to Bethlehem to be born, flees to Egypt, returns to the land of Israel, and then settles in Nazareth, in the Galilee in the north. In Luke actually says something similar. Luke gives us similar things here. Because Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth of Galilee. Right? Now, Libyano said something in the live stream that Jesus' hometown was Nazareth. Nope. That's after he was born. But Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And I think he said hometown in the sense of him being born. If he didn't say it in that sense, then I'm wrong. But as we see here, Luke has it similarly, that Joseph came up from Nazareth. So they started in Nazareth. And I believe he also says that the angel appeared to Mary in Nazareth, as it said in the book of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 1. Let me open it up. Yes, this is Luke 1 here. Yeah, Luke 1. So it says here, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth. So it's following Matthew well, that the angel appears to them in Nazareth. Right? In chapter 2, it says Joseph came up from Nazareth to Judea, to the region of Judea in Israel, the land of Israel, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. So it's following the same way, that they go from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Luke gives us the reason here because of the census taking place in the time of Quirinius. All right. So he goes up to Bethlehem because he was of the house and family line of David, which is another important point, that Joseph was called in the genealogy of Matthew, because Matthew's genealogy is the genealogy of Joseph. Luke's genealogy in Luke 3 is the genealogy of Mary. In this genealogy here of Matthew, it says Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who is called Messiah. And in Joseph's lineage, we see King David. That's why the Bible says Joseph, son of David. And if Joseph is a son of David, then it makes sense to say that Joseph would have had claims to land in Bethlehem because he was of the family of David. So it makes sense that Joseph would be able to stay in Bethlehem because he is a son of David, meaning it would make sense he would have claims to land in Bethlehem. So they go up to Bethlehem for the census. This is following Matthew. Matthew and Luke are in agreement right now. And while they're there, the time came for Mary to give birth. So she gave birth to Jesus in Bethlehem and laid him in a manger. Now, if we go down, it says here, when the 8 days were completed for a circumcision, he was named Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived. And when the days of their purification according to the law of Moses were finished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. So we see here that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, it seems that Luke skips the story of Jesus going to Egypt. He skips that and goes straight to Jesus being circumcised in Jerusalem, which according to the map was south of Bethlehem, north of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is here, Jerusalem is up here. And Jesus is circumcised, he's dedicated in the temple. And then after that, they go to Galilee, to Nazareth, right? So that's what we see there. So, first point that can be made, Luke doesn't mention that exodus to Egypt. Is Luke false or is Luke wrong? Is Luke going against Matthew? Not necessarily. Luke is silent on that point, but it does not necessitate that Luke is contradicting Matthew. Because it doesn't seem like like Jesus spent a long time in Egypt. Jesus is stated as being born in 4 BC, and Herod is stated of dying in or around 4 BC. In 4 BC, maybe after 4 BC, like maybe in or around 4 BC, right? So if that's the case, then they may have very well just spent a few months in Egypt, right? Or a few days in Egypt. I don't know exactly. But whatever the case is, they did not spend a long time in Egypt. They did not spend a long time in Egypt. Possibly a few days in Egypt, actually. Not even, I wouldn't even say a few months. Possibly a few days. And after Herod died, then they go up to Israel. And it says you the land of Israel. Right? It says you the land of Israel. And he entered the land of Israel. So in reconciling Matthew's record with Luke's record, that after they went to Bethlehem, he was birthed in Bethlehem, and from Bethlehem they went up to Jerusalem. I would say that when Matthew says that they entered the land of Israel, I would say that since Joseph is a son of David, he has land claims in Bethlehem, at least according to him being a son of David, having King David in his lineage, right? It would make sense that he would stay in Bethlehem for a little while since his son was born there. But because he hears that Archelaus is ruling in Judea, he now leaves Bethlehem to go settle in Galilee. But he stays in Bethlehem to be close to Jerusalem for the circumcision of Christ, and then they go to Nazareth. That makes sense. That's plausible. So, going back to the text here, they flee to Egypt. They return to the land of Israel, and they enter the land of Israel. But he's afraid to stay in Israel. He's afraid to go there, go to Judea, stay in Judea. And he withdraws to the region of Galilee, right? And they settle in Nazareth. And Luke has it. Luke skips over that exodus to Egypt. They're in Bethlehem. It's not that the exodus to Egypt didn't happen. It's just that Luke's skipping over that part. From Bethlehem, right? The 8 days are done. The days of purification are finished. And they bring Jesus to Jerusalem to be dedicated. So they don't spend long in Egypt. Maybe a few days, it could be. And then they head back up to Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, Jesus, they stay there for a little bit of time. They go to Jerusalem for Jesus to be dedicated. And then they settle in Nazareth. So hopefully that answered the two contradictions brought up by the Orthodox Muslim. A long session, about an hour and a half. It's 2:50. I think I'm ending here. But in the live stream, these were new to me, but I still give my answers to them. That is plausible that these very well happened. And my answers in the live stream with him were not the best. They were not, well, they were good answers actually, but they were not necessarily thought out too well because I didn't have the information on hand. But as I've studied and as I've shown in this live stream here, there is evidence and reason to plausibly state for the first contradiction that Josephus was wrong in his recording of this census. Or that there was an earlier census that Josephus doesn't talk about, which is the census that Luke is referring to in Luke chapter 2. And in regard to the second census, in regard to the second apparent contradiction, Luke skips over the time in Egypt. But the time in Egypt is not a lot of time. They go to Bethlehem for a little bit of time to stay there. But then Joseph, being scared of Archelaus, he leaves Bethlehem. They go to Jerusalem, do the rites of purification, meaning they had to be in Judea. Remember, Luke says they were in Jerusalem. So they had to be in Judea. So they stayed in Bethlehem for a little bit of time, went to Jerusalem, and then resided in Nazareth to stay away from Archelaus because of Joseph's fear of this new king, being the son of Herod. Whatever the case is, we were able to get through these contradictions, apparent contradictions in the Bible. The Bible is inerrant. The Bible is without error. The Bible is the Word of God and the best book ever written. Now there's more information we can go into, and there's more that you could study as well. But hopefully you had a great time here. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully I helped you answer these contradictions Hopefully I shared my information that I have learned. And hopefully you had a great time here with me today. My first live stream in a minute, June 1st. I don't know when I'll go live again. I'm not usually as consistent as I should be, but I work on my own time. So when I do go live again, we'll go for something else. Well, with that said, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening today as we went through the apparent contradictions. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great Sunday. Beautiful day. Well, pretty good day today. It's going to warm up in Canada. Thank you, Aaron. This guy goes to my school. Thank you for showing your love. Thank you, Ron. This is my brother here. Thank you for showing your support. And thank you, Young Christian, for always being here as well, giving me your input as well. With that said, have a great night, a great afternoon. Stay blessed. Let God take care of the rest. All the best. Stay blessed again. And with that said, BibleLover1234 out.